Let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Morris Mtombeni. I am the dean here at Gibbs. And I thought it was important for me to introduce myself as such, because I know there is a son of the Kagiso family who likes to make fun of me and call me other names as I introduce myself. So hopefully, Fanny, you won't call me that fancy name anymore. You'll just remember that my God-given name is Morris Mtombeni. It's a distinct privilege for us to welcome you here at Gibbs. And I thought as I do a few words of welcome, and that to confirm that today we are joined together as family. And because we're joined together as family, we've dispensed with protocol. And so to those that love protocol, I say to you, good evening, all protocol observed. So I'm one of the few people that has had the opportunity to read this book before coming today. And I want to just, my opening remarks, just share a thing or two. It is a very deceiving book in its thinness, in how short it is. But please do not be deceived that it's a light reading book. It is a celebration, and here I want to honor the author, Gangalelwe Tiro. Let's give him a big round of applause, please. I do run the risk of getting tongue-tied, Gao, so can I call you Gao for the rest of the evening? I was explaining to him, and for those, if I'm correct, it means he is super patient. That's his name, super patient. He doesn't get easily irritated. So even me asking his name, I'm sure he will say that was absolutely not necessary. I want to say that I invite you, when you read the book, maybe for the first time, just read it straight through for its lightness, but thereafter, read it for meaning, because each and every sentence, each and every paragraph is filled with richness. It just transports you as if you are there living the life of this young man, Molobi, as he matures and meets the love of his life, as he matures and discovers his awakening as a leader in society, as he meets power and kind of experiences the dark side of power, and through that experience transforms into recognizing that there's a difference between leaders and leadership, and chooses the path of leadership as opposed to the path of being a leader. We're here today to celebrate Mr. Eric Molobi, the leader, because that's what we call him. But when you read his life story, you realize he never considered himself a leader, but he was truly part of the leadership. I did say that I was going to dispense with protocol, but there are a few names that I would like to honor as part of recognizing what we're doing here today. Many of you will recognize these names as I read them out. And I'm not going to read them as if they're gone. I'm going to invoke them and invite them into the room. Many of them clearly are not with us, but a few are. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Dr. Bears Nadir, Reverend Frank Chikane, Dr. Max Coleman, Dr. Ellen Busak, Dr. Abe Nkomo, Father Smangaliso Mkachwa, and of course, the man himself, Eric Molobi. These are the founders, the visionaries of Kagiso Trust. We honor you today alongside this special man that has brought us all here together. We are in a business school, and I was sharing to our Telezi that often people come to Gibbs and they think we're a private bank, or they think we're a commercial bank, or a private organization. I want to disabuse you of that. This other professor here likes to make fun of me. We are a division of a public university. We don't exist outside of the statute of the University of Pretoria. We only exist as founded in the statute of the University of Pretoria. I mention this because I imagine when Kagiso Trust was founded 40 odd years ago, because we're celebrating 40 years of Kagiso Trust this year, when it was founded and you were in the throes of rendering South Africa ungovernable through breaking down the destructive educational system that was there. You never imagined that people like me will be standing here today representing excellence in public institutions. So I think just to demonstrate some of the excellence, some numbers that you may want to reflect on, and I know diversity and inclusion in other parts of the world is being cancelled. In South Africa, on average, about 67% of the academics are doctorally qualified. In the world, about 15% of women are professors. In South Africa, less than 50% of black academics are doctorally qualified. That is the standard. Within the University of Pretoria's Gordon Institute of Business, more than 50% of our academics are black. 80% of them are doctorally qualified, and that number is increasing every year. More than 60% of the professors on our campus are women. And I think we celebrate these numbers and these statistics and this commitment to excellence in that we said we will transform, and as we transform, we'll raise the standard to be recognized amongst the leading institutions in the world. And it is in part in celebration of the vision of some of the names that are listed. And today we're going to celebrate only one of them, Mr. Eric Molobi. And so with that, just to tell you where we are going, there are going to be a few conversations that are going to be started, beginning with Thabiso Ratshomo, who will give us some interesting perspective on Mr. Molobi. And then I'm going to ask Lele to come through and give us a family perspective. And then we're going to have a keynote address from Professor Rensburg, and then we'll have a conversation with our panelists. And in that conversation with our panelists, I look forward to, we'll give you an opportunity to also engage and share your experience of this special human being called Mr. Eric Molobi. And I would be remiss, I mentioned all those other names, and I'm going back a little bit before I hand over to you, Thabiso. I want to welcome the Molobi family, and especially May Martha Molobi. Let's give a big round of applause, please. Something tells me we might be celebrating the wrong person. We should be celebrating you. In the sense that I know you have ghost writers in the world, you know. There are people whose names get put in the front of the book, but there are people that are actually writing the book. And I suspect that in this chapter, in this narrative that is called Eric Molobi, you are the true architect of his life. And so with that, I want to say, please, we appreciate you and we welcome you here this evening, and hopefully we'll do the best in celebrating your artwork. It gives me pleasure now to introduce, he didn't want me to read his entire CV, a very important person. He played different roles. Initially, in 91, as he joined as the regional director of Kagiso Trust. But coming from the VAL, I'm sure he's got very interesting stories to tell us. He's got many other roles later on in life, working with some really colorful people. I don't like to use the word important. It is wrong. Colorful people. But I want to really ask Thabiso for you to take us back a little bit and contextualize Mr. Molobi in the context of Kagiso as we begin the celebration. Ladies and gentlemen, and I did Thabiso Ratsom, welcome.
With dispensing of the protocol, because it can be tricky sometimes in situations like this. Prof has already welcomed everybody, so I don't have to really do that. And I know that there's also time constraints because we started early. On January 1991, one of the days, first weekend days, Eric Molobi and myself began our new employment at Kagiso Trust offices, then based at the Dara House. Eric was the executive director designate, and I was coming in as a Transvaal regional director designate. As executive director, Eric assumed the leadership of KT, and I became accountable to him via the national program director, the late Mr. Vincent Mukhale, one of Eric's confidant of the time. At that time, I had already met Eric through the activities of the United Democratic Front. And at KT, our association and interaction lasted for a period of 10 years. Eric's appointment as executive director and the appointment of other staff members coincided with the transition of KT from one character to another. The motto, or what the new generation has taught us that it is called a tagline. The motto of KT was liberation, peace, development, and was accompanied by a logo that depicted a dove in flight as a sign of peace. The unbanning of the erstwhile banned organizations, the ANC and others, can be seen as kickstarting the process of liberation. The process at the Conference for a New Democratic South Africa at CODESA signified the facilitation and attainment of peace buttressed by institutions such as the National Peace Accord. What was now left was to be achieved was the implementation and delivery of development programs in terms of the motto that the founding fathers of the KT had developed as liberation, peace, and development. So development of the country, therefore, was the main thing that was really facing us, and Eric came in to obviously spearhead that. Until this time, 1990 and before, KT had funded activities aimed at sustaining the struggle against apartheid and state repression. It funded paralegal institutions such as advice offices, civic and residents associations opposed to unfair rental increments under the slogan of Asina Mali. And it was also contribution to alleviation of unemployment and living conditions of the oppressed people in the rural areas and the Bantustans through financial sustenance by funding community creches, early childhood development centers, which invariably employed community members. The completion, as I said, of the motto of development was to be implemented, therefore, under Eric. Indeed, once he was in office and with the supporting staff, a number of new and innovative projects were developed under his tenure as executive director. The Johannesburg Housing Company, for instance, which provided low-cost housing in Johannesburg. The Mvula Trust, which provided water solutions to the country. The Institute for Local Government in Logov, which was to prepare new councillors for the new government. The Soul City series, and the transference of the KT bursary program to the government, which then set up the Tertiary Education Fund of South Africa from the foundation laid by the Kagiso Trust bursary program. So, and this is a precursor to the National Student Financial Support that we are seeing today. While we are funding, we continue to fund those organizations in the rural areas, like Soetfontein Rural Development and so on, the Printing College of South Africa, where we made sure that black people were able to get into those colleges which were mainly for whites. We built an incubation center in Kimberley and a community clinic in Khalishiwe. We developed a capacity of a program to develop the capacity of community-based organizations, which we call the CBO support program, to be able to, so that CBO could be able to access funding and be accountable and more. It was during his leadership, that is Eric, that in 1992, the trustees resolved that KT should take advantage of the opening political and black economic empowerment space, that KT should establish an investment company that would contribute to ensure the sustainability of KT beyond donor funding. Thus, under his leadership, the Kagiso Trust Investment was formed. His leadership style and acumen was demonstrated, reflected in various ways and traits. Ethical leadership. The reason why KT has not attracted any media headlines about corruption or inappropriate behavior is because there's always been zero tolerance of corruption. And Eric used to say to us, he would like to go to bed and have a peaceful sleep because he knows that the type of staff that he had the necessary ethos and capabilities to be able to keep the trust out of problems. He had a lot of personal commitment to the organization to let it survive beyond donor funding. And there are various strategies that he developed, for instance, to try, that is because before even the dividends came from KTI, to try and survive and make KT to survive, particularly after 1994, when the major donor, the European Union, stopped funding KT. It was a difficult moment at that time, 94 going towards 95. But Eric had also a trust in his staff. He had immense trust and placed those people that he placed in authority and those he knew before as his comrades. And that's why he always believed that those people that he has put in place are the people who will make sure that there's no corruption and so on. Eric was very humble. And he was always willing to understand what his staff was saying. While officially was Mr. Eric Molobi in those moments of easiness, but in moments of easiness and relaxation, we call him Bra Eric or Bra Era. He was one of us. On Fridays, he used to hang around and buy drinks in a true spirit of comradeship with and other senior members, without having the mantle of being the executive director and our leader. He was one of us. Diplomacy, he was always diplomatic in many ways. And his diplomacy always used to put him in trouble because many people approached him about this project, for him maybe wanting to be funded and so on. But because he always had confidence in his staff, he'd brief us and say, look, I'm going to meet so-and-so about funding. And I would like you to tell me what is the problem and so on. And we'd go there and have a strategy of how to deal with this person. It didn't matter who that person was. But what was key at point is that we should not compromise the ethos of KT and so on. And also, once he was appointed as executive director, one of the first things that he led us to do was to develop the standard operating procedures of KT. For instance, how to appraise a project, how to determine whether we should go on and not, which things were not there before he came, because his appointment, as I said, came at that time, and part of it was to modernize KT and make it an organization that was being able to fund people according to certain procedures and so on. So that was one of his legacies as KT. Networking, he networked with a number of people in the development, the political, and corporate sector. In this would sometimes be beneficial to KT or open for KT for future engagements. Information and storytelling was one of his cornerstones. In those meetings, he would always share stories of his experience, what he saw when he met people. He met a lot of people in government. And one of the things that really touched me one day was when he went to meet Joe Slovo as the Minister of Housing. And he came very distraught that people were going there and calling the minister JS. And we were saying, people don't recognize that there's a new government that is coming in. And we need to respect those people and so on. So those are some of the things that he did. And I just like to, one of the stories that he told us also was when he went to see Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi. And I'm aware that Prince Zuzifa is here. And he said, when we arrived there in Ulundi, we didn't know what to do because, the chief was very antagonistic to KT. And the chief said to him, before you can start, when you have a wound, and the wound has a pus, you must first clean the pus so that you can go ahead. And I thought the chief was very pregnant at that point. And Eric came back and said, in spite of all the things, the meeting went very well because it was part of ensuring that the work of KT survived in those areas and so on. So in Eric's time, I would say that KT moved, as I say, from being purely an organization that sustained the struggle against apartheid and alleviated poverty that was caused by apartheid. And that's why, for instance, you find that the slogan, liberation, peace, and development became very important. But during his time also, the organization grew and was able to withstand all the difficulties of reduced donor funding, because when the European Union reduced funding, we were only left primarily with the government of Japan. That was funding us at that time. But it was a difficult time at that time. And at the same time, there was also KTI that has to be developed and so on. So we can say that over time, the foundation that he built moved the tagline or the motto from overcoming poverty to igniting human minds. So truly, under his leadership, KT moved beyond means that the founding members had hoped for. And we hope, therefore, that wherever he is, he's with the founding members, Dr. Beas Nodie, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Dr. Ebin Komo, Yunus Mohammed, Professor Hervel, Dr. Mes Coleman, and the colleagues he worked with close at KT, Vincent Mukhani and Ahmad Dengo. And we hope that as they reminisce and reflect about the organization, they are happy, pleased, and content that through their selfless contribution, KT has survived and is celebrating 40 years of existence today. This gathering, therefore, attests to the fact that Eric Molobi's legacy and personal contribution has not been overlooked, and it is in fact being celebrated here and now. As for KT, and in his honor, his passion and development in education, the organization had designed a program that has been running called the Eric Molobi Scholarship Program. This program funds particularly those students from disadvantaged areas, from the rural areas like Tafelkop, Shandima, and so on throughout the country. And that is a legacy that we have in KT. And we thank him particularly for his family, in particular Mrs. Molobi, Osmatha, as some of us would call her, the children Lele and Tisetso, and the children for having taken Eric, for us having taken Eric as one of us and utilize him in the growth and development of Kagiso Trust and Kagiso investments, and thereby stole a portion of his time for 16 years from 1991 to 2016. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thabiso. You know, what you'll see when you read the book is that those images that Thabiso was creating in your mind will come alive. I'm going to be inviting Lele to reflect from a family perspective. However, just in case you think you'll only get that from her, How did a great job of demonstrating how forward-looking and innovative Ntate Molobi was. He writes about the valiant, Martha, that the much-loved valiant, and I think there's some young people in the room, they have no clue what I'm talking about. If you think that's bad, there's also something called authors called James Hadley Chase and Peter Shirley. And I'm sure very few people remember Peter Shirley. But anyway, this Valiant talking about innovation. I read with interest, I couldn't stop laughing, that he used to, even though he kept it clean, he had this idea of taking off a wheel or two each night. This was his security measure, to make sure no one stole his car. This is the kind of human being. At one level, he's debating, he's negotiating, he's thinking strategy and tactics. At the next level, he knows, this thing is important to me. Lele, over to you. Welcome. Let's give her a big round of applause. No protocol. All protocol has already been observed.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very old school, so please forgive me. Today, my duty is to tell you about a different Eric Molobi. An Eric Molobi who came home as a dad, as a husband, as a grandfather. Most people gathered here know that this has been a very, very long journey. We tried to put this book together before Khaunga Lelwi came on board, and to say the least, it was a disaster. But come to think of it, as a family, I don't think we're emotionally ready to take the journey. Besides, I honestly think that my father would not have willingly allowed us to pen his life. As he always said, there was nothing special about his journey. When he started chemotherapy, one or two of his colleagues said, Lele, why don't you ask Chairman to be recorded and let him talk about his life? I did. His response was, what is there to write about, madam? And I left it at that. But I also think he was dealing and trying to understand what had befallen him. Cancer took him by total surprise. I'm sure most of you here know. I could tell. He said to me when he stared death in the face, how? How? I went to gym and tried to live a healthy lifestyle. It was almost like he tried to avoid the reality that the apartheid system and his battle with it was now killing him literally. It looked like he wanted to avoid that. But deep down I knew that he knew that it is apartheid that got him to that position. He would walk around the pool after chemotherapy 20 times, and I'd say, but I'm still strong. Why are the doctors saying I'm stage 4 lung cancer? So this cancer was called adenocarcinoma. Tisetso will correct me if I'm wrong. And he got this cancer from being bitten so much when he was in detention at John Foster Square that he ruptured a lung. But he was so fit. He was actually Eric's age when he went to Robben Island. But he was so fit that he healed. The lung healed naturally. So when he got to Robben Island, that scar, later on in life, 2005, 2006, became or caused cancer. Anyway. It was almost, I digress. The real reason why I'm here is to give you a brief glimpse of who Eric Molobi was away from the corridors of business, boardrooms all over the world, and political circles. I'm here to talk about who he was as a husband, father, and grandfather. Basically, who he was at home. Only after his passing did we get to know him, as most of you knew or know him. Literally, on the very day that he passed, we were in awe of this simple man. to quote my sister, what? This guy who drank his Heineken and joked around, calling me all sorts of names? Because the articles and coverage locally and globally, we were shocked. We did not know who this man was. We just knew Papa, who was so goofy and so funny. He adored Mama. They called each other sweet, and he addressed us as Madame. But I'm sure with JJ Njeke, Fanny Titi, Roger Jadina the back there, Khotso Skuman Nkunku, Andile Sangu, your Tabis, Abdi Tabiso, Hilton, people who worked with him closely. They know the other name he used to call other people when they were acting the fool in business. I will not say the word. My parents met in their teens and ended up getting married. They were separated by death on his 59th birthday on that fateful June day in 2006. When he was imprisoned, you pointed out correctly, Prof. My mother worked shifts and overtime to put him through UNISA. He also signed up for tennis, and all he needed, Mama provided. Why would you choose to play tennis when you're a prisoner? I don't know. Because you don't have money. Who's going to pay for this? But Mama didn't hesitate. She also ensured that she saved enough to honor all his visits at the island. So when he was released, he did his best to spend as much time as possible with her. From our first home in Pimville, they would catch the bus to work in the mornings. And in the afternoons, it was beautiful watching them walk from the bus stop to our home. But most times I would see him come back earlier than my mother because my mother was already working at Wits University after being employed at Drummond's Printers. And he woke up every morning to go look for a job. And he'd come back with nothing. And I'd say, just the newspaper, Papa, no Simba chips, no chips, nothing. And he said, I haven't got a job yet. And I said, but you have to, make it snappy. There's a TV at the opposite house. And there's, programs that we want to watch. My sister and I, Sergeant Samadula, some of you remember that. We want to go watch TV. You better get a job. We need TV. And he said, my baby, be patient. Something will come up. In Diepkloof, our second home, these lovebirds would jog from our home to Nasrec. We lived in Diepkloof Phase 2, those who know Soweto. On weekends, they'd go to gym in Bram because I think KT offices were already in Bram at the time. At our last home in Observatory, they would go to gym at 5 a.m. But my father then started doing a very annoying thing. He'd knock on my bedroom door as they walked out. But Papa, why do you do that? That's so rude and annoying. I was 17. Madam, I want you to think about how fat you will eventually become if you don't join us. Come on. You have to start now. Well, I go to gym 3 times a week now. I hope he can see that. If he's a fair ancestor, I hope he's proud. So on weekends, they'd go to Old Ads, whilst we were living in Observatory. They'd go to Old Ads, gym, or Virgin Active in Bruma. Bruma Lake, there was a Virgin Active there. But he'd come back, home alone. My sister had and still has a very strong sense of justice. And she took offense. I did too. Why? Why are you coming home alone? Where's Mama? Girls, your mother is talking to everyone at the gym. She greets people and starts conversations when we are supposed to leave. And I get caught in these conversations. So please, go fetch her. We'd get to the gym, and Mama would still be talking to people. He loved spending weekends at home. Watching boxing, he was obsessed with boxing. Too obsessed. And I would ask him why. He says, Madam, I often wonder, I watch boxing to see how far can a human push their body. He loved to watch Leon Schuster DVDs. over and over again. And he'd call us, madam, come. And we'd come running with him. Oh, we probably bought a new DVD. We come in. No, it's the old thing. And he said, don't you find this funny? And he said, no, we've seen this 10 times, before. If he wasn't doing that, he was listening to music, or he was in his study quietly reading piles and piles of documents and books. So during these times, quiet times at home, the bell would ring and he'd run to our bedrooms. Shh, tell them I'm not home. Don't tell them I'm... And Dee said so, loved answering the intercom. Hello, he used to suck a thumb. Hello, who's this? Also, it's Uncle so-and-so. Oh, Baba just told us to tell you that he's not home. You can imagine once we opened the door, what would happen. Awkward moments. He'd religiously open grocery cabinets with a pen and notebook in hand, making a list of what he called Ntutse Shotang, meaning the top-up list. He'd get to the shop. He loved Hyperama. And he'd call, sweet, I'm looking at new detergents here. There's a new Omo. I'm going to buy it. And you must please tell me how you like it. I'm bringing it home. If he wasn't doing that, he'd go to malls with my sister for their dose of music and sneaker shopping. In between, he'd buy lotto tickets. He was obsessed with buying lotto tickets. And please, Eric must not kill me. My son buys lotto tickets religiously. And he'd say, oh, you're laughing, madam. And odd weekends, he'd call me and say, okay, fine, come take your portion of the lotto winnings, because he'd share, equally between my sister and I. And when I go get the money, he said, oh, you're laughing now. So is it funny now that you're getting money? So Martha, my mother, loved her church. I think JJ knows that since non-way. So every Sunday, she'd come back home in the afternoon. He'd say, Martha Msadiwaka, hey, litena mudimu man. Meaning you're giving God a hard time. How do you guys expect this guy to listen to all of you? You pray in unison the whole day. He must be stressed. He said, I stay home to try and be with you, and you go to church from morning till afternoon. I think I'm going to buy your own church and put it in the backyard. And he'd make fun of my mother, and my mother would call him Tate Muruti. And when my mother spoke to Muruti, hey, Antate, hey, Antate Muruti. And he'd say, Madam, come here. And I'd go and say, listen to her. It's almost like she's speaking to God himself. My father was a party animal. Every December holiday, he'd get envelopes and put cash in them and drive to Heilbron, Sebokeng, Palm Springs, Vereeniging, Mabopane, Soweto, delivering these envelopes of cash to family members as Christmas gifts, and inviting them to our observatory home for the mother of all Christmas parties. And this happened for many, many years. When our sons were born, his life took a very different, beautiful direction. It was a marvel to watch. On the day Eric Jr. was born, we are told he was so excited. He called friends and colleagues that he was now a grandfather. He asked my husband to kindly let him name our son after him, and he had no sons. Fortunately, my husband agreed, and he was forever grateful for that. Khomolemo, our second-born, kept him on his toes. He spoke non-stop, still does. The boys changed his shopping habits from four-wheeler, bikes, TV games, and books, but he also loved observing them. So there's something that I never forget. There's a movie called Stuart Little that Eric used to like watching when he was about 7, 8. And there's a part where this mouse would get lost, and Eric would cry. My child would cry a river. And he'd say, Madam, come see. Can you see? He's going to be a very well-rounded human being. He has emotion. He's going to be a good guy. And never, ever tell him not to cry, because that's a good thing. Let him cry. He has compassion. And And he cried simply because this mouse got lost and couldn't find home, his way home. He loved saying that he could not wait to see them as teenagers and on their graduation days. His dream was to see them as adults and how they would turn out. It was his wish. Sadly, it was not to be. What is more sad is that he never lived long enough to see his granddaughters, Musadi and Basani. And I know Basani would give him a hard time. All his grandchildren will never get to see and experience his hard work and kindness in action, especially in the world of business. In conclusion, I'm happy to let them carry this in their hearts forever, that their grandfather, Eric Maroi Molobi, had a gift of seeing people fully, not only for who they were, but for the infinite possibilities of who they could become. May he continue to rest in perfect peace, and thank you for keeping his memory and legacy alive. We are deeply, deeply thankful, and this is appreciated. Thank you.
I think I'm going to fail my job of keeping us to time, and I do apologize, but I couldn't cut you short. That was truly beautiful. There's a part that Gao writes about after Ntate Molobi is taken from his family, and he disappears for months, and he can't be found. Eventually, when he's found, he's given a choice. Do you speak to your lawyer, or do you speak to your wife? We are told he chooses to speak to his wife, because he wants to know how his daughters are doing. So Lele, when you were regaling us with that personal account of your father, it brought to life why it was much more important for him to connect with his family before he can learn about his rights. Please, let's give Lele a big round of applause. I won't take too long. This gentleman has a long history in education, and I think maybe one of his illustrious moments, or ones that he might like to forget, is during the fees must fall era. But what those students did not know is that he had already been practicing in the National Educational Crisis Committee in the mid-'80s, when he was working with Mr. Molobi. So I wonder if he can come and share his experience with Mr. Molobi over the years. Professor Aaron Rensburg, congratulations.
All right, good evening. Former President Halima Motlanthe and Mrs. Gugu Motlanthe, Mrs. Anlimbeki, His Royal Highness Prince Zuzifa Buthelezi, Mrs. Martha Molobi, the Molobi and the Ratsiko families, Excellencies, comrades, colleagues, friends and family. It's a very special privilege and a great honor to be with you on this auspicious occasion. As we join Ausmartha, Lele, Tisetso, and the four families that Bra Eric and Ausmartha's marriage united, and the new ones that they gave life to celebrate with Eric's life. I'm especially indebted to Ausmartha, Lele, and Tisetso for the honor of offering some remarks and reflections on this very special occasion as we celebrate his life, encapsulated in Gao's beautiful, and exceptionally well-crafted biography. In sociological inquiry, fulcrum moments are pivotal points in time that serve as catalytic turning points which significantly alter the course of history, a situation, or an individual's life. The term fulcrum derives from the Latin word fulcire, meaning to prop up or to support. In a literal sense, it refers to the point on which a lever rests, or is supported and around which it pivots. On the other hand, in a metaphorical sense, a fulcrum moment is a critical juncture that can shift the balance and lead to a new direction or a new outcome. In history, fulcrum moments can be like the fall of the Berlin Wall, which marked the end of the Cold War and which led to significant geopolitical shifts. In South Africa, the 16th June 1976 Soweto uprising was a fulcrum moment that, notwithstanding the apartheid state's brutal crackdown, catalyzed young people's optimism that the end of apartheid racism was nigh. Similarly, Nelson Mandela's release from 27 years of political imprisonment was a fulcrum moment that opened the way for South Africa's transition to democracy. In personal development, a fulcrum moment might be a life-changing decision, such as leaving a company after having been turned down for a senior position, choosing a new career path, or moving to a new city that sets the stage for future growth and potentially new and liberating experiences. In storytelling and literature, fulcrum moments are often used to describe key plot points that change the direction of the narrative or the fate of the characters, moments that are crucial for the development of the story, and these often lead to the climax or the resolution. In business, a fulcrum moment could be a strategic decision, such as a merger or an acquisition, that fundamentally changes the company's trajectory. In technology, it might be an innovation that disrupts industries and creates new markets. In transitions to democracy, the transition might impact the durability of social mass and liberation movements that enabled such transitions, which in turn may impact the depth and the durability of the transition itself. In sociological inquiry, fulcrum moments such as slavery, decolonization, colonization, the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, migration, political revolutions, economic crises, climate change, the digital revolution, artificial intelligence, COVID-19, social movements or cultural shifts act as pivotal turning points, leading to significant social change. Shifts in cultural norms or transformations in societal structures. These moments often disrupt the status quo and create new dynamics, progressive and retrogressive, within societies, influencing how individuals, groups, and institutions interact and function. Fulcrum moments matter in sociological inquiry, for they provide insight into processes of social change. They highlight the role of social agency at individual and collective levels in shaping and reshaping society. They reveal the interconnectedness of social, economic, political, and cultural systems, and they help predict potential future disruptive trends. By studying fulcrum moments, sociologists strive to understand how societies respond to crises, how they adapt to new circumstances, and how they create new systems of meaning and organization. In the context of biographies or life histories, fulcrum moments refer to life-altering, critical events or turning points in an individual's life that significantly shapes and reshapes their beliefs, their behaviors, their social position, their identity, their evolution, their revolution, and the social interactions, such as education, migration, marriage, divorce, parenthood, the death of a loved one, a career change, a personal crisis, such as a serious illness or disability, and participation in social movements or a revolution. These moments are pivotal because they often lead to profound personal transformations, influencing how individuals perceive themselves, their roles in society, and their relationships with others. Sociologists use the concept of fulcrum moments in biological research or personal sociological inquiry to better understand how personal experiences intersect with, shape, and are shaped by broader social structures and systems, cultural norms, and historical context. Gender, race, class, sexuality, spatial location, or institutional policies and rules are examples of these. Here, these fulcrum moments serve as anchors for storytelling and for self-reflection. By examining these moments, using biographical interviews, life history analyses, case studies, and longitudinal studies, sociologists can uncover the complex interplay between agency and structure, explore the construction of identity, and gain insights into patterns of social change. Recognizing a fulcrum moment is one thing. Pivoting to a new future is another. This is because the huge personal and collective investments which had been made and created and co-created in the status quo ante, including within the domains of the intellectual, the spiritual, the emotional, the social, and the cultural. These had all been essential domains that contributed to the detail, the momentum, the color, the texture of the journey, from the optimism of the initiation, call it the norming, to the uncertainty of the testing and the proving, called the storming, to the high confidence levels of problem solving, the forming, the high commitment of the highly productive, the performing, to the melancholy of the disengagement stage. Pivoting requires the unbundling or the dissolution of all of these investments, while the new future opportunity comes with immense uncertainty, which will require activation, reactivation, mobilization, remobilization of new fountains of intellectual, spiritual, emotional, social, and cultural resources to, again, initiate the norming through storming, forming, performing, excelling, and adjourning stages. Encouragement to pivot is always there when one is self-aware, since conversations with a spouse or a partner, to those with the close colleagues, do help unlock one's initial resistance and doubts about the pivot, and opens one up to more meaningfully considering the pivot. Great biographies and autobiographies provide us with insights into these dilemmas and choices that the subject is entangled with and within. For we always have choices, opting to retain the status quo, deferring the pivot, or activating it. There are, of course, considerable risks with crafting either a biography or an autobiography. One such is that of constructing the subject as a saint, offering little insight into the complex detail of life and decision-making. Another is that of simply walking us through information about the subject rather than how the subject has actually navigated fulcrum moments that are interconnected, intersectional, operating at earth, societal, family, and individual levels. For after all, we exist not only to eat, drink, and sleep, but to recognize, to deconstruct, to make sense of, and to synthesize signals emanating from all of these levels. At the minimum, we alter our orbit to absorb these signals. However, we could do far better when actually exiting our prevailing orbit for the next and higher orbit spiral. Thus, we are ordinarily influenced, shaped, and in turn do shape our existence. How Tiro has taken great care. Haro, please just stand up for us for a moment. Ngabong. He's taken great care as a painter explores the breadth and depth of a canvas to avoid many of these pitfalls, and has landed an admirable and commendable account of the life, its questions, and Bra Eric's tentative and more often definitive and exemplary answers. On a number of occasions, I read through sections of or the entire manuscript, and many pleasant memories would flood into my consciousness. My first encounter with Bra Eric, alongside Vusi, Molife, H.H. Dlamlenze, Membatisi Mdladlana, and other regional education leaders, was of unconditional acceptance. I was 25 years old, and without much ado, within an hour of our very first NECC National Executive Committee, I was told with little choice in the matter that I would be General Secretary. A pretty daunting and serious role and responsibility. I'm also now reminded of leadership guru John Maxwell's sage advice. He says, believing in people before they have proved themselves is the key to motivating people to reach their potential. A crown that fits Bra Eric comfortably, even in the afterlife, and to which many of us here this evening can bear witness. I also recall one fulcrum moment with him asking me to join him at KTI and my decision not to pivot. It was 1997. I was Deputy Director General of Education, and we were at a critical national turning point in terms of embedding a range of national policies that I believed required my undivided attention. He was pretty disappointed, in fact, downright annoyed, and lashed maybe more seriously out with that label. I do occasionally wonder where I would be if I had chosen to pivot. Bra Eric was a prescient leader who was in many senses ahead of his time, negotiating and problem-solving complexity, novelty and ambiguity, for which there was little to no existing knowledge to rely on, nor guidance available, and doing so with discretion and judgment. His reimagination and reinvention of the NECC during the state of emergency in 1986 to 1990, to be embraced by sympathetic universities with the establishment of the education policy units, come to mind. As does his reimagination and reinvention of Kagiso Trust to the extraordinary successful KTI and its successors, Kagiso Ventures, Kagiso Capital, and Kagiso Tito Holdings. Ditto for the Independent Development Trust and the Joint Education Trust. Throughout, Bra Eric was also deeply values as much as family grounded, for which we have to appreciate his parents and siblings, as well as Ausmartha's formative role and those of Lele and Tisetso. And we've come to know and learn from him about self-aware, selfless, humble, compassionate, and ethical leadership. Indeed, Bra Eric was umuntu, imutu. So this evening, we salute his legacy as he continues to live in so many of us, and as he calls on us to give life to the Bra Eric in us, especially at this time of unmatched domestic, Pan-African, and global volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, where his vision, understanding, clarity, adaptability, agility, and resilience would help us move forward. I thank you.
I would like to invite our panelists to please join us. I would, in the book, I'm going to invite everybody through the book as my instrument to do a reflection. I didn't know this because as I look as I do, but I'm actually much younger than I look. So I did not know this, that can I call him Bra Eric? I feel like a bit of a fraud. I need authorization. Could have been an amazing soccer player. I also understand he was an exceptional soccer player himself. And this kind of, for me, kind of links to this notion of agility, what Prof. Rensburg calls fulcrum moment and pivoting. I think even on the soccer field, he had a few fulcrum moments, but he was able, I understand the things he was able to do with his bodies were not normal as he was dribbling his way through the soccer field. So Dean, you've known him for a long time. You worked with him in the 80s through the 90s. You joined Kagiso Trust in 1986, I am told. But you look young, dude. I don't know how you achieved that. And so I wonder if you could reflect for us some of your memories of this agility that is Eric Molobi. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you very much. I have known Eric for quite a few years. He very interesting because I was Eric's boss for most of the time, but he was my mentor. So it was a very interesting kind of dynamics. And I think today invoked mixed feelings and memories about Eric. He was a friend, he was a leader, he was a visionary, he had a very strong constitution. Eric had a way of really, like in boardrooms, it was very difficult to get him to accept a position. If he has a position, he will really push it to, to one would say, to the bitter end. But I want to pick up only one issue about Eric, which is quite important to me. Eric, when we became free, he was quite fascinated with the new government, with democracy. I remember in some of the boardrooms, we really had lots of debate. For instance, the formation of the IDT. We were part of the TNDT. I was part of the TNDT as well. But Eric was very strong that we should collapse into the IDT, KT, because he had so much respect for the new government, you know, and really believing this new government is going to bring wonders to the South African terrain of development. He really believed in it so much. I'm not sure what he would say now if you were to come to our situation today. So, fortunately, the majority of board members prevailed. And that's why we actually have KT still surviving, outside of IDT. We were all there, though. I mean, I can tell you we were served on the TNDT because of Eric's influence. But there was something that Eric did personally to me, which is so important even for the time that we are in, was while he was serving in the KTI, he really threw me in the deep ends of things. I mean, I was young. Of course, I was sitting on the board. I mean, Eric was, he had a great sense of humor. He would tell stories. And then, boom, he's invited to go to Algeria with the president as part of a binational commission. And he's going to meet President Bouteflika. And you know what he did? He then said, Zo, get ready. You are going to Algeria. And I was young. I arrived in Algeria. I was in the midst of business people. I was completely lost for depth. But I thought out what he was doing then. I mean, I was young. But he was actually preparing me and mentoring me as a young leader. And thinking about Eric, finally, I think about this particular aspect, I mean, I was going to tell you about great stories about, he was a great storyteller. If he tells a story in the boardrooms, you will always remember going to Nigeria and for a wedding and then getting into a plane with smoke coming all over and people coming into the plane with chickens and but I look at our situation today, where we are going through as a country, there is a very big challenge about mentoring young leaders. And we have discussed that, for instance, in KT itself. It's a big, big challenge today in South Africa to mentor young people. And in the trust itself, we have got other young people that we're trying to mentor, to bring in. And I think countrywide, Eric actually led the way. I remember that during the time of the formation of the KTI, I mean, JJ, he really shocked us. He brought two young people, not after the war, as they say in Afrikaans. JJ and Fanny, you remember during that time? He introduced them to the board and said, this one is a CEO, the other one is a I mean, they had no experience, nothing. But look what they've done. And that is the Eric for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. So I'm not being disrespectful when I say Cheryl. I think I'm allowed to say Cheryl. So Cheryl, it's overwhelming for me to witness the life of Bra Eric through this biography. But I wonder if you could bear witness to this man who led from the back in the UDF and the United Democratic Movement. Could you just help us to get an insight as to who he was in that part of his life?
Thank you very much, Prof. And let me also just say how good it is that you reminded us what KIPS is about and how far our country has journeyed. Because we're sitting in a time when there are huge challenges in our country and in fact in the world. And I think thank you. And says Martha, just thanks for, and Lelo and everybody for delaying maybe a bit. Because by heavens, we need it now. We think of the times when Eric went to jail and through the formation of the UDF. And the high season of Ronald Reagan, of Maggie Thatcher, and the terrible cruelty that crowd visited upon the most vulnerable people in their own countries and the tone they set for the world. And here we find ourselves back, waking up every morning, and we're not sure what is going to hit us again sometimes in our own country and sometimes in the world, and it's good for us, how and as Martha, to perhaps have that now when we need to really reach deep into ourselves to stand up and live in the way that Eric would have. If we think of since the time of the 70s, the 80s, when the UDF was formed, and through that whole period, and we forget what little time we had, it was 3 years that the UDF was allowed to live. And when many people were killed to, in fact, silence what the UDF stood for and what we did. It's from 1983, and then in 1986, the first state of emergency was declared. But we look at the courage, and we look at the wisdom and the vision, and we look at those of us, and it's just so wonderful to see who we are here. And I look at another football player here, you know, Lek, Terra Lakota, who got his name from that. And who Eric would have called, I think I'm going to go where Iron and others did not want to go before me. And he would just call us these bloody monkeys, you know? It was a favorite word of his.
It was.
He used it, in fact, Comrade Judge Azar was saying earlier with Sidney Mufamadi when we were socializing inside there. Yeah, today they would have taken him to the Human Rights Commission just like that, you know, for whatever. But if we look at, and I think, Iron, your reference to the ability to pivot and the kind of vision we saw there, I just remember, and together with the courage that it took to sometimes pivot, and Bra Eric's ability to read moments and to act decisively in those moments. And I think there were a few ones. I remember many of those from the UDF days would remember with me, when we had to grapple with how do you stand firm on principle and look at how you pursue those principles through your strategy and your tactics that you adopt. And remember one, and how you brave to sometimes push things which many people might not agree with you. I remember that one night in Port Elizabeth in the Feather Market Hall, when we had to discuss, I see Trevor Battle just giggling there again, when we had to actually decide how do we deal with this question, amongst others in that conference, of deciding whether what do we say to white South Africans? Because then people were already starting to challenge the legitimacy of their sons being sent to the border, when the border had now moved into the townships, and it was no longer out there in Angola anyway. What do we say when the call was made to white South Africans to go and participate in that referendum? And here I would say, Dean, you know that Eric listened intently, actually. And somewhere, I think it must have been about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, as was our want in those days. We are going full steam at that time. And Comrade Eric eventually stood up in that conference and, in fact, proposed, together with Comrade Azar and Firoz Kachalia, why we should tactically call on white South Africans to, in fact, go and vote no, to participate. And boycott politics was very much part of, as a weapon, you know, in those days. And you can imagine the fireworks that followed, but he stood firm with some of what Dean, you've just said, you know, like you just stand your corner and you take people calmly and firmly through that conversation. And then, of course, the question of the formation of Kagiso, and I think it's, again, when we think of what Donald Trump is up to at the moment, and the challenge which many NGOs actually face, and that ability to navigate firstly the formation of the trust of Kagiso, and to put the tramlines around it so that there was never any impropriety. It was led with vision, it was led with courage, and it was led with integrity, and it was built in a way that made it robust and resilient. And then when, in 1990, when it was clear with the democratic government that we were now going to be channeling that money, development aid was now going to go through, as it should, through a democratically elected government. What do you do with that vehicle of development that Kagiso Trust was? And the vision that him, together with the comrades here, actually took to pivot that into the Kagiso industries, the formation with these youngsters, these monkeys that he found around the place, these clever people like Fani and others, who actually went and formed. And I think I would also just say Eric, the mischievous one, and the clever. I remember the first time we had passports and we now went to New York to go and hold the corner again. But Eric had one obsession. He heard about this shop where you could get for a bargain price Floorsheims, ne? And it couldn't be anything else. It had to be Floorsheims. But I want to just conclude by saying the family man again. Says Martha, you were just the love of his life. Hey, but what he called his curls, man, they were his downfall. That telephone bill that he had when he was the chair of Telkom. We said to him, just don't pay it, man, just don't pay. He says, no, I can't. I'm the chairman of this company. And we're fighting for people who are not paying. And they would come after school. They would sit on his phone and make these long calls. But he kept that line open and he paid it. You were just his complete weakness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it's very hard for me to think of JJ as a monkey. But I'll try. And, it's when we think about the impact of the commercial, the ventures of Kagiso, I think you can never overestimate the impact that you've had. So one of the criticism of black empowerment is that it's benefited the few and not the many, which is why we then had to have broad-based black economic empowerment. This cannot be said of Kagiso because from its founding principles, it was designed to benefit the many. And I'd like to understand what enticed this accountant who had never run a business to think he could be an entrepreneur and be this monkey that is going to change the world. Please, JJ, help us to understand what motivated you and what did you have to do to persuade this other young man sitting at the top there to join you in transforming this vision of business into reality.
No, thank you. Thank you, Morris. Actually, the journey to start KTI was an interesting one because, as you say, my parents didn't even have a spaza shop. So I couldn't say that I came from a business family. I was just an accountant, and he thought that I could count at least. So we started with Fani, and as Jinzo has said, we were young. In fact, I think a few months thereafter, we decided that we need Eric to become part of the executive team because we would go to these meetings as these two young people that, many senior business people couldn't take seriously. But I think the interesting thing is that Eric trusted us. Young as we were, he trusted us. I think 3 or 4 months after we had started, one day we decided we were going to go to Eric and tell him that we want to resign because we had not brought any deal to the business. And he looked at us and he said, "Are you guys serious?" We said, "Yes, Eric, we're getting salaries every month, but we've brought nothing." And he said, "Yeah, but you always say no when I send people to come and talk to you." We said, "Yeah, we don't want to waste your money." But he said, "You're not going anywhere. You're going to run this business." And I think the rest is history. Because I think if it was somebody else, I mean, we didn't, I mean, one, we had no track record of running a business. And the second thing, I mean, in about 6 months, we had not demonstrated any track record of investments. So we were really candidates to be fired. But I mean, he trusted us. And the other thing that he taught us was that this business must be built on integrity. And I mean, whenever there were, I mean, in some of our investments, you know, executives who wanted to take shortcuts, he would say, what would Archbishop Tutu say if he reads about Kagiso Trust in the newspapers in a negative way? And that was his, I mean, philosophy that we must never embarrass the trustees of Kagiso Trust, I mean, because of our association with the trust. And I mean, you can imagine these were clergy, I mean, they didn't even trust business, let alone, I mean, if we were to be involved in a scandal. And I think the third issue was black excellence. I mean, that was one of the things that that was drilled in our minds, that we must not be just a run-of-the-mill investment company. You guys must be excellent in what you do. And I think, I mean, the track record of the activities of, I mean, KTI, I mean, they still, some of those businesses are still around to this day, and which is really, I mean, testament to Eric's vision, and I think, as far as I can remember, there has never been anything reported about Kagiso about theft, corruption, greasing people, I mean, to do business, always above board. And I think that was one of the keys. But also, I mean, some of the people who worked at Kagiso have gone on to become, I mean, champions in their own right. I mean, you have Roger here, who was chairman of Westland for many years. I mean, Zanele Matlala, I mean, and many others who, I mean, from that dream of building a black investment company, there was an opportunity, I mean, for other black executives to rise. I mean, we had a fight, I mean, to appoint Roger Jardine as CEO of Kagiso Media with some other company that I won't mention, because they said he had no track record. And Eric said, I mean, when will black people ever have a track record? If we keep saying we can't appoint them because they have no track record. And I mean, he ran a great, I mean, business called Kagiso Media, and year after year producing good results. But that was one of the key considerations for him, that we must promote black people to also have the experience to run, I mean, commercial ventures.
Thank you very much. JJ and Jack. So I don't see him in the room, but I want you to reintroduce you to one of the young men that you guys also gave an opportunity through Bra Eric. You know him as Andy Lesang.
Yes.
Since last week, we know him as Dr. Andy Lesang.
Yes.
Is he here? I don't see him in the room. But if he isn't here, he did this while he was doing his job as the new chair of Transnet. And I think it's that kind of leadership of recognizing young people, and they paid over and over and over many years later. Mr. President, one of the things that How drew to us, I know in South Africa we call people former presidents, but you're not my former president. Yeah. You are my president, so I'm going to say Mr. President. Here I'm the king of this land, so I can anoint you as the president. How points out that on the one hand, Bra Eric was not a forgiving man. So if you lied once, he did not forgive you. And this is a story told through the voice of Dr. Andy Lesang. However, at the same time, he didn't judge a group of people. He judged you on your own individual merits. He reminds us that, for example, when Bra Eric met the son of the man that sent him to Robben Island, Tak Himstra. And he reminds us that whilst he got a bit of a shock, he ended up being very good friends with Tak. And because he judged him on his own individual capacity. I wonder if you could give us an insight in terms of how you navigate this responsible leadership journey, but also doing so by seeing each person as a human being, not as part of a class that has to be defined. That's my starting point in introducing you into this conversation, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I knew Eric when we were still very young, actually. He was at a vocational training center in Dube, and we were at Orlando High. And they had an excellent squad of Soccerites, footballers. He was at vocational at the same time as people like Chipa Molobi, a great footballer for Orlando Pirates, Tokyo Lesolang, trustee, Mos Mabena, a great squad. And because their enrollment was a limited one, so they didn't have all the divisions. And in playing against high schools in Soweto, where it would just be the A division playing against the vocational training center A division. And all of us knew that you couldn't start a fight with the vocational team because they are, tools of trade. Were dangerous weapons. So they could produce mallets and chisels and all kinds of dangerous weapons here. So, but Eric was a consummate gentleman. I mean, even as a footballer, he actually played at that time over weekends for a team called Mofolo Dynamos with one of his teachers, Teacher Shabangu, were in the same team. And, football is a philosophy of life because it's about teamwork. And when Eric went to prison, it was a great loss. I mean, at the same time, it was a great message to all and sundry that even such an upright, law-abiding citizen could actually be, involved in the struggle against the obnoxious system of apartheid. And when he came out of prison, Lele said he was job hunting for a long time, but he ended up working for Munich Re Insurance Company. And very few people know that where the ANC head office is now, called Luthuli House, was actually the headquarters of Munich Re Company. And by sheer dint of example, as a conscientious worker, Eric persuaded his employers to employ activists, former prisoners, people like Patrick Lipunya and others ended up working for Munich Re just because of who Eric was and the impression he left on those German employers. And that is why when the Rivonia trialists were coming out of prison, even before the unbanning of the ANC, it is Munich Re which dedicated 2 floors of their building to the Rivonia trialists. They said, well, they could have offices there, downtown, And it was all because of Eric's, example and influence. Today, that building is ANC headquarters and is renamed Lutuli House. And very few people know that it was actually through Eric's example that the the owners of Munich Re felt that they could take the risk to provide office space to the Rivonia trialists when they came out of prison. And of course, one of the lessons that was passed on to us by our leaders was that we must never be like our oppressors, and that we are actually better human beings than our oppressors. And that is why, someone like John Kadimeng used to say to me that, if you are a leader of the organization or you are a public office bearer in government, you need two hearts, he says. He says you must always have two hearts, because when the first heart seems to be running out of patience and you're about to get angry with people, the bigger heart kicks in and says, no, please, don't do that. So when Gaungalelwe, his name is Gaungalelwe, it means that you need the big heart to kick in before you get angry with him. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Khotso, can I ask you to, you should be here, not me, but I'm going to ask you to come in whilst we're sorting out Hilton.
I thought I should reflect on two intimate meetings we had with Eric. And the first meeting is one of the last meetings we had with Eric. We decided with trustees to visit Eric. Eric was already at home, and we painfully had to accept that Eric had cancer. And what we used to do is to go and visit Eric. We visited Eric, and we had a conversation with Eric with some of the trustees. The conversations firstly started with talking about the country and the ANC. Cheryl, you're quite right. You can be rest assured when we spoke about the country and the ANC, there were a lot of monkeys in Eric's cage, right? And I think, but that's not the conversation I want to share with you we had with Eric. Eric changed the conversation, and Eric said to us, he always had this dream that we could build Kagiso Trust one day to be as big as the Ford Foundation. And that was his dream. And he said, but he knew that the Kagiso Trust investment would take us many years to achieve that dream. And he said he just hoped one day we never abandon the dream of building Kagiso Trust into a Ford Foundation. And as he was speaking, he started dropping tears, right? And he said, I'm quite content and a happy man, and we wanted to know, but why? And he said, the first Rand BE deal that Kagiso Trust participated in, he believed that it's going to propel us very quickly towards achieving the idea of building Kagiso Trust into as big as a Ford Foundation. The other conversation we had with Eric, we were preparing for the 20-year anniversary. And during that process, we decided to put together a book called Reflections. And we interviewed trustees on a number of occasions. And the first person we interviewed was Eric. And in the conversation, we asked Eric two questions. And we said to Eric, if we had to honor you one day, how would that look like? Right? And the second question we asked Eric was, what is a legacy you would want to be remembered for? Eric was very angry when he answered the first question. And he said, Khoso, there is absolutely nothing to celebrate. Don't honor me. There's no significance in honoring me. And in answering the second question of legacy, I'm going to read, this is what Eric said to us during the interview. He said to us, we have a purpose, and that is Kagiso Trust has to outgrow us as individuals. Years from now, when we are all qualified ancestors, it must be here, and it must still be serving people. That's Eric's quote. 19 years after the death of Eric, we still focused in building this institution. 19 years. Eric Woodby said, those monkeys are damn good monkeys. And Prof, I thought I should share that with you.
Thank you, Khosi. I'm going to go with you, Bongi. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I thought we were going to have age before beauty.
Oh,
but that's
no.
fine, Hilton. We're still going to listen to you. Just kind of, I'd like to touch on what is probably Eric's unintended legacy. I think I've often asked, when I was doing the interview, this was some time ago, I was trying to remember, how did I come into Kagiso Trust? I couldn't understand why these very ostentatious religious men, Zanele, Eric, were asking me to come and join the board. I still don't remember what happened. But anyway, so I joined the Kagiso Trust board. I was very young. I was doing the calculation the other day. So I left Kagiso Trust to go into government. And I went into government at 33. So I was really very young when I was on the Kagiso Trust board with my outspokenness. But what I just want to say is I think in building Kagiso Trust, and I think it's good I came after Khotso, I've just realized that actually Kagiso Trust is an ecosystem it's a multi-generational, multi-skilled, a variety of professionals, activists, families, individuals, but it's become an ecosystem that has remained connected. It's very interesting to see all the connections in the room. It has remained connected, and I think everybody who came into Kagiso Trust during Eric's time and afterwards have managed to do the little they can to take forward the vision that Eric had for overcoming poverty. And I think we've kind of gone through, it's now gone through another iteration of the vision. I mean, but also I think everybody who has been connected also carries that humbleness in terms of connection. I know many people in the room have held positions of great authority and stature, but I think fundamentally the people who are connected through Kagiso Trust have a mutual respect and a mutual appreciation, a consistent appreciation of humility. I'm going to embarrass Roger right now because I joined First Rand. I don't know how they got me to join at the time that he became chair. And I think I said this to you, Roger, once, but everybody used to we were on the same floor, and it just so happened that my office was next to Roger's. So people would scramble to get into Roger's office, chairman of the board, and Roger would come and look for me in mine. And nobody could understand this relationship, but it was exactly that. And the point was, it wasn't it was whatever conversations we're having, they had to do with something to do with implementation. So I think, for me, the legacy, which we are now part of, and we need to continue to ensure it remains in this format, is one of humility, one of commitment, and one of, I'm going to say, delivery and action and integrity. And I think a lot of that comes from also the Molobi family. I think we've had so many different reasons that we've been coming together over the last 19 years. And each one of them is very different, including going to Soweto to a restaurant. I remember when we launched the scholarship program up in Pretoria. And today we're here to celebrate the record of that relationship. So I just want to really also say thank you to the Molobi family for keeping us as part of the glue for this ecosystem that Eric was integral to setting up. So without necessarily talking about specific stories, I just thought that for me, that's what's coming to mind as we're sitting here tonight.
Thank you so much, Bongiwe. Give a round of applause. Seems like we all like making fun of Roger. I met his brother serendipitously only recently, and I was telling him stories about how funny it was. About 2 weeks ago, I met Chris, and he says he's the real doctor. When Chris gains weight, he looks like Roger. When Roger loses weight, he looks like Chris. So, so it's a funny story. Be patient with me with that big heart, because I want to bring some other voices.
Yeah.
And then you and I will conclude. So I wonder if we could go online and ask one person online just to come on. Hopefully it works. We weren't sure that it was going to work. And you know, when you are an initial investor in a business school, you earn some rights for people to. So the Gordon family made an investment here, so we always try and honor them. So Hilton, I hope we can bring you in and ask you to please share a little bit of your memories with Bra Eric.
There's been so much that has been said. I've sat listening with a lump in my throat and a big lump in my heart. Okay. My permanent and abiding memory of Eric is not Eric the activist, not Eric the business leader, not Eric the developmental expert, not Eric any of those things, but Eric the exceptional and extraordinary human being. At Eric's funeral, I told a story, which I'm going to actually briefly recount again. My youngest son had cancer the same time as Eric did. And Matthew was in a ward having chemo, and Eric was down the corridor having sort of a degree of palliative care. It was the day before he died. And I was sitting with Eric, and then I'd go and sit with Matthew, and then I'd sit with Eric. And Eric at that stage could not really talk. His voice was sort of pretty much diminished. But he knew, and I told him that Matthew was down the corridor, so he insisted on going to go and sit with Matthew. And Eric, he couldn't really walk, but I was on one side, and one of the sisters was on the other side, and we walked slowly down the corridor, and he sat on a chair next to Matthew's bed, and he held his hand, and he couldn't really say anything, but he just sat holding Matthew's hand, sharing humanity, humanness, caring, love, and life. And there wasn't that much life left. So Zoe called Eric a mentor. I think he was a mentor to an extraordinary number of people, but he was more than a mentor in that he cared, he nurtured, but he empathized. His heart was just so extraordinary, and you can see that in his family. I mean, anybody who knows Martha, who knows his daughters, knows what extraordinary legacy he has left behind. So is Eric's legacy Kagiso Trust, which is remarkable? Is it KTH, KC? Is it our family of companies? No, it's his family of extraordinary people who are there because he was just the most amazing man. Then I don't think it's fair for me to carry on terribly much longer. You've had a very full program, and I'm making myself a little upset here. So Morris, will you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. No need for forgiveness. It's our opportunity to remember with you. Thank you so much, Hilton. You've touched all of us in the room. I suppose I can use my poetic license before I come to you, Khao, and redelegate. I do want to remind Fanny that I'm now his boss. So, Fanny, I'd like to delegate the job you tried to delegate to me via Khotso, and ask you to explain why we have these extraordinary, beautiful flowers in front of us here.
Good evening, everyone. I'm not sure that I'll answer the professor's question, but let me just give you two reflections. The first takes on from what Hilton said. In my life, I have 4 people who have been most influential. My mom couldn't read or write, but instilled a sense of discipline and hard work. My dad, who could read and write after 2 years of schooling, but had a sense of optimism and a sense of possibility about the future. The third person was a high school teacher who was dedicated to making a difference in the lives of the kids that he was entrusted with. And the fourth person was Eric Molobi. And what is common amongst the 4 of them is that they led their lives in an exemplary manner that said more than any sophistry of words or wisdom could impart. So as I think of Eric, as I think of this wonderful human being, I really take away, as I continue to be a little older, just the power of the example of his life. And I know I'm not the only person who has been influenced, affected, inspired by the power of that example. So the fact that he could sit with Matthew, say nothing, is really exactly the kind of influence and the power of example that Eric had. So that's the first reflection. The second reflection is about coming into Kagiso. JJ was a partner at Pricewaterhouse, so he had a bit more credibility of being hired. I was just a mathematician who had just done an MBA, wanted to go into business, and Eric hired the 2 of us. And I often wondered whether there was a little bit of tribalism in Eric in hiring a fellow tribesman, because I had no experience, okay? But what was most important, and JJ touched on this, is we knew that we had Eric's complete trust and faith. The opportunity to work in a business, most people would probably not have been there in the early 90s when you would be a first black, and generally you would be looked at with a level of skepticism about whether you know anything or you can make a contribution. To walk into a place where your credibility, your capability, and your integrity was unquestioned was a breath of fresh air. And to walk into the world of work with an inspiration to work hard because you had the trust of somebody who believed you could change the world was really pretty fundamental. So in my normal life, those were the 4 people made a difference. In my commercial and business life, there is no doubt Eric was the instrument and the most important influence. And I owe every single success in my career to him, and I'll forever be grateful to him. And for anyone who can make a difference, open a door, hire somebody, recommend somebody, that particular act of kindness and faith can change a person, can change a business, I believe can change a country. So I'm grateful. So Ausmatha and the children, he was an incredible man, Eric. We called him chairman, actually. I always think of him as an exceptional personality, a transcendent human being. Ever grateful that meeting him was a fulcrum moment, if I may just plagiarize the professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Fanny. And with that, he also honored this moment, Mematha, by sharing this small token of his appreciation. And so thank you very much for everything you do, Fanny. How you made this possible. So I'd like to give you the last word and ask you possibly to reflect on whether you thought your work would ever bring this kind of joy, celebration, reflection, and invitation for all of us to really reflect on what a life of purpose and a life of meaning might look like. Because it's not too late for some of us. We still can reset and reform and recharge as we think forward. Your reflections, please, Khao.
Yeah, all right. No, yeah, it is, quite warming, heartwarming, the sort of response that, one is getting, over this work. But, just to tie on what you say, more than anything, in my mind, my thinking was that, for me to consider this book successful, this is not just, an invitation to people to admire, the good character and the traits that, Eric Molobi exhibited. But it is also a challenge, to reflect, on leadership, on how we lead and how we want to be led. And caring, exhibited the same kind of social consciousness that, Eric would have, exhibited. But, just maybe final point that I would like to make that, probably has not been reflected on is that I have a special interest in writing about people because, it allows you to do, all sorts of things. You can tell all sorts of stories, if you look at this story, it's a story about history, it's a story about politics, this is a story about business. But one key element that always fascinates me is the formative influences of, the individuals that one writes about, what makes them turn out the way they turn out to be. And I think one fundamental issue that, I try to reflect on in the book is that in the case of Eric, and this is not often, spoken about, is one of the major formative influences would have been the environment under which, he grew up with, the sort of people that raised him and imparted the kind of value system that he actually had here.
Wonderful. So in business schools, in businesses, I remember when I started working in 1991, when you were working, when you started KTI, I was working for the Gordon family at Liberty Life. We were discouraged from thinking politics, talking politics, and all of those things. And I'm surprised because here we do teach history and politics as part of the curriculum to our MBA students. And I'm surprised every day how few people know our history. And I am telling you that this is going to be an important, not textbook here at Gibbs for those that want to understand their environment, where they come from, so that they don't make the same mistakes that were made before, so that they have an opportunity to make new mistakes going forward, their own original mistakes, not the mistakes of their forefathers. I want to thank you for your work, and I want to thank you all for your patience, and I'd like to invite you, please, to give our panelists a big round of applause. Thank you.
My name is Eric Molobi. My grandfather, Eric Molobi, was detained by police under Regulation 3 of the Internal Security Act, which allowed for detention without trial. In a handwritten note he slipped out of prison, he wrote to the Kagiso Trust trustees with some of the following words. 15 December 1987. Greetings to you, the board of Kagiso Trust and the entire staff. I don't feel pity for myself, nor do I think that my fellow detainees ask for mercy. What we want is for the civilized world to take heed and note. Even from the dungeons of apartheid, shame and human degradation, we raise our voices for the world to know that we still believe in the democratic rule. We still believe in human rights and human freedom, even for those who keep us in conditions such as those we experience daily. For all governments which, in one way or the other, deal with the South African government, may you not forget that there is no shortcut to democracy. If it has to last, it must include democratically elected leaders of our people.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I would have wanted to make a long list of that protocol, but you have indicated that we shouldn't. But anyway, Prof. Rensbeck covered. Yes, thank you very much. It has been wonderful to reflect this evening on the life of Ndate Eric Molobi, an inspirational leader who was so pivotal to Kagiso Trust in its first 20 years. We know that the trust and its mission were deeply meaningful for Ndate Eric Molobi, and today, nearly 20 years after his passing, his legacy sustains the trust as it celebrates 40th anniversary. There are many reasons to celebrate the role Ndate Eric played at Kagiso Trust. First as its CEO in the early 1990s, then as a trustee, but I'd like to make special mention of just 3 key legacies. A man with vision, unshakable ethical standards. He had a deep understanding of how collaborations multiply the impact of development work. And he had total intolerance and distaste for corruption, one legacy that sustains Kagiso Trust. I hope he would be proud of the way we have held true to these precepts. Secondly, Ndate Molobi regarded education as a gateway to transformation and freedom. That belief drove his activism and greatly influenced his work at the Trust and other organizations where he worked. Today we can say that the Trust's education program are among our most successful and impactful. You'll have seen in the video there, young people that are beneficiaries of Kagiso Trust in their schools, in their homes, at tertiary. Even now we even have an early childhood development program, which is part of the legacy of Ndate Molobi. I think that should be making you proud. And you can identify yourselves in those young people who have been touched by Kagiso Trust. In our recent efforts to amplify the benefits of vocational training, we see an opportunity to redefine education outcomes in a way that aligns them with the skills our economy needs, hence our current program in technical education. Remember, previously, we used to just be in high schools, we used to concentrate on matric, and then we asked ourselves, so what? Now we have gone into technical education, which still speaks to the legacy of Ndate Molobi, who says education must transform lives, and we are transforming lives through education. The third legacy of Ndate Molobi's leadership is also the reason the trust has reached its 40th birthday. It has been said before that when donor funding dried up, and Ndate Molobi was visionary enough to say, we are not closing down like many NGOs closed when donor funding dried up. Kagiso Trust instead formed an investment company, which is now sustaining us as a trust today. People always try to find out, this NGO that is so big and that is so effective and that has resources, where do the resources come from? That investment company of Ndate JJ and Linda Fanny, it's still giving us dividends, and we are using those dividends to then run these programs, which you saw here. We now have an agricultural program. We have a program of local governance. We don't say local government, we support local governance, which encompasses both the government and others who must help government in governance. We celebrate our 40th birthday. As we celebrate our 40th birthday, the value of the trust investments has increased multifold. I won't say how much. And if well managed, as is the case currently, dividends from these investments will fund our programs indefinitely. That is, if those funds are managed the way they are funded today. Our new tag, what did you call it? What the cool people call it? Peace Development Tagline. Tagline, yes, it's cool, yeah. Igniting human capacity. Previously, our tagline was overcoming poverty, and we asked ourselves, what actually do we mean? But igniting human capacity means each one as you are seated here, you are in your individual jobs, you are in your individual businesses, in your churches and everywhere else. Human capacity is what sustains civilizations and should then sustain South Africa, the economy. I had a long speech, but I am going to skip and just say, we are living in exciting times, and we are really proud to be standing on the shoulders of giants like Ndate Molobi. Some are given an opportunity to stand on the shoulders of giants and then mess it up. I will not say who, when, how. But at Kagiso Trust, we were given that opportunity. When you're given an opportunity to lead an institution such as Kagiso Trust, it's a big yes to you as a person and to others as people around you. And today, I can proudly say, as chairperson of Kagiso Trust, we are resolute in making sure that Kagiso Trust lives the legacy of Ndate Molobi. Why should we come here and celebrate the legacy of Ndate Molobi while we leave this room, we do other things that are not Molobiist? Really, it wouldn't make sense. So we are living that legacy. And we can assure you, and you should hold us accountable as people here. I'm very glad I saw so many old friends, old faces. Some I had forgotten that they still exist, but it's so good to see. It's really so good to see them. And you should hold us accountable to say, if we get out of line, you have every right to call us back into line. Our 40-year celebration is not just a party or a jamboree. Yes, we will party, but we are now going into the next 40 years. And we are asking ourselves, as Kagiso Trust, as the Molobiist, What are we adding to South Africa as a country? How are we solutioning to the country's current challenges? What are we doing in the future? Yes, we can celebrate the past. Yes, we can reminisce about the past. But as Kagiso Trust of today, what are we doing for the future? I think I'll stop there. But if you don't stop me, when I talk about Kagiso Trust, I can go on forever. Yes, thank you.
Brian, are you here? I can't see you. Brian Wafa. Waru. Very quickly, Brian, I wouldn't bring that. Leave your laptop. I'm giving you 60 seconds. 60 seconds, Brian. I'm being unfair to Brian because he's been enormously generous. I know I'm being unfair, but I'm going to make it up to you, I promise you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Brian. He's the CEO of Juta. You can do it from here, Brian.
Thank you. I suspected that it would come to this, so I prepared for it. So thank you very much. I'm overwhelmed by the number of my heroes that I see tonight. So I'm trying not to behave like a kid in a candy shop, but I'm really privileged to be with you tonight. Thank you very much. I think one of the challenges that we have in the world today is the inability to distribute the dividends of freedom and democracy to the majority. We have made good progress in the last 100 years since Ghana in 1957. But what I really appreciate in the mantra of Eric Molobi that says, seek your liberation through education, is exactly that by seeking liberation through education, we can transfer that ability to generate dividends to individuals to do it for themselves, and in the process to create opportunities for others. That's what I take about what I heard about Baba Molobi tonight. I just would like to thank you very much. I think in the publishing process, there is the last stage that involves thanking the non-participants and shooting the innocent. I'm just privileged as a non-participant tonight, but I would like to thank the Juta team and the Kagiso Trust and everybody that worked on the book. Mama Molobi, I'm told that without you, this book would not have happened. Thank you very much, and your family, for allowing us to utilize the illustrious life of Baba Molobi to inspire others and possibilities in their life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I wonder if I can invite Basani, Musadi, Khumulimo, Eric, and Disetso to come forward, please.
Good evening, everyone. All protocol observed. I stand here before you tonight as a doting mother to Musadi and Pasani, a loving aunt to Kananelo Khumulimo, a sister or wife, but most importantly, a proud daughter to Martha Limaroy. On behalf of the Molobi family, my task this time is a simple vote of thanks. This project has taken the family almost 17 years to complete. There was a reason it took this long. Papa's story had to be written by his best friend's nephew. Our worldly wishes to have his memory written at a certain time stood no chance against Kismet. With that said, I would like to thank Mudimu Lebadimu for always being on time. Thank you, Mama, for continuing to honor your husband's legacy by keeping us together with your prayers. To Khao, thank you for your literary luminance. To all the interviewees who contributed to the book, to those of you that are here with us, and those that are no more. Kagiso Trust, congratulations on 40 years of service. Cheers, and to many more. To Kagiso Capital, a huge, huge thank you, particularly to Mr. Khotso Skuman and Ms. Teresa Griffiths. Kagiso Tiso Holdings, thank you to Juta and the company for producing and publishing the book. Thank you to all the panelists for the incredible and honest conversation tonight. Thank you, Prof. Rensburg and Hilton Abubam. Thank you to all the media and Sugar Apple for their audio-visual services. A thank you in advance to all of you who will purchase and gift this book to many, many, many friends, family across the country and world. Lastly, but certainly not least, a special thank you to the king of this land, called Gibbs, also known as Professor Morris Mtombeni. Thank you for your generous spirit and mind. Thank you for allowing Papa's story to be celebrated so befittingly. Again, re lebohile.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. And I know we are running half an hour over time. We serve wonderful food here. Please join us for free drinks. If you overindulge, please Uber on my account. I'll sort it out. I don't want you, please, to find yourself on the wrong side of the law or the hospital, for that matter. Please join Hao outside. He'll be very happy to give you a signed copy after you've purchased it of the book. And thank you very much. Let's all continue learning and living a fulfilling life. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.